So for today, we'll be going over the cycle. And there are 12 terms that are important there, which is the source, tandem, offside, and polar. Then wave swell, tidal wave, unconscious source, unconscious tandem, coastal wave, unconscious offside, unconscious polar, wave break. Okay, those are kind of like the main 12, but there were some other terms that we will discuss as well as they become relevant. So let's begin. The source. Okay, the source is for a person where they begin, actually before we get to source, to start there, is the configuration of closed circuits. That's what a mojo configuration is. It's the 8 pod powers and how they're connected. And as we know, all humans in all configurations have all 8 of the powers, and all the 8 powers talk to one another. So the point we're talking about now is we're talking about the major flow. It's sort of like there's just an unbelievably intricate network of streams and counter streams, like an aqueduct system. But there is a way that your geography, your innate wiring, that actually flows. And of course, if you're ever doing any kind of aqueduct system, it doesn't matter if it's for military purposes, energy purposes, to crops, travel, you must work with, if you're smart, the way the Nile goes, the way the Mississippi goes. Does that make sense? So the peak pathway is sort of like the major flow, the most significant flow of energy in your psyche, although everyone has all 8 and all 8 talk to one another. But kind of like glaciers in a way, there is the power that's first, and its waters are the waters that all the tributaries underneath it, or what do you call it, I forget the term, but where they feed off it. That is the starting source. So think of it as like rain and polar ice cap, or ice cap. It's sort of like it's the beginning of what you know as far as the energy in you. Okay, that is a source power. For this reason, the source power is going to address, and this is from earlier stuff, the considerations, 2 of them, of subjectivity, objectivity, perception, and discernment. We already know what those are from earlier lessons. Now, it's only going to answer 2 of those, either subjective and objective, plus either perception and discernment. That is going to inherently place the source of their waters. That will be where, like all cultures, wherever their water source is, or it can be some other source, although water is the most popular, but it can be any source, they orient their concept of cosmology based on that. I mean, pretty much all cultures do that. You know, wherever they place that to be, then everything else radiates out from there. And that is because that is how we're wired. That's actually how it is for humans. And we possess an innate geography. This will be incomplete because it only answers 2 of the considerations plus 1 of the priorities. It's going to answer 1 of the priorities of compass bearings, environmental register, dynamics steering, and worldview map. It'll answer 1 of those plus 2 of the considerations. That, of course, leaves a hunger. That's important. There's a natural pull. So before we go to pull, we're going to go with our will to shine. I don't believe in will to power, because that's a bit myopic, focusing on one standard for particular mojos. But I do believe all mojos do come with the will to shine. And that means, this is integral to where we're going with pod layer theory, is humans have a purpose they are born with. They have something beautiful that is overflowing, a gift that wants to give, and they were born with that. And that's always there. It's like their internal flame, their internal source, whatever you call it, but it's like a furnace that will never turn off. It will always be there for them, and it's what they were built to do. So that's a starting premise of, you really just have to find that, and then you really can't go far wrong. Where you go far wrong is when memes, for example, or inclement social alchemies inform one incorrectly into thinking that their peak pathway is not the peak pathway. So that's important, is your peak pathway has been designed over millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years, to be incredibly successful. So note that right off the bat is that this has been working extremely successful. If it sounds like this sounds like magic, well, it should. Anything you've ever seen Microsoft or some elite company engineer has nothing on Mother Nature. So it should sound awesome. And in fact, anyone who sells you a model on "we're not built awesome" is almost certainly lying to you, or just stupid, or both. So the source, it's ever flowing. You will never run out. From the moment you get here to the moment you leave, it is always going to give you more, more, more. Next, now we talk about the pull. There will be a pull to the tandem power, and that is because the source power only addresses those portions of the psyche. Before we get further, I think it's a good time to mention this, is that, as I said before, not only do all humans have all 8 powers and all 8 powers talk to one another, 4 of those power stations are in the conscious element, and we can read that physiologically. But even there's a strong 2. 2 of those are stronger than the others, and it backs all the way up to the source. That doesn't mean the story has gone anywhere. All that matters is the scope of perception, the scope of understanding for the individual. I would say their perception, their position, which are kind of one thing. That comes from where they become aware of their story. And depending how they're configured, there's a starting base. The rest of the story is still happening. You're just not as consciously aware. You'll be tugged by these connections to the rest of the story that's going on. When you're in the womb. When in the womb, the story was going even before you, the apparatus, became aware of the story. When you become aware of the story, you kind of, like a video game, you start in some room and you go explore the rest of the game from there. That starting location in your psyche is where the source power is located, because it's where you have the most understanding of things. Now, the parts of the story that pull on you will tend to pull on you more noticeably and understandably in a peak pathway. The other parts are still pulling on you. However, you may not note them pulling on you, or you do note it, but you can't quite make out how it's doing. You just know that you have, sometimes this mood's on you, or sometimes your energies go this way, or they go up, or they go down, whatever. You know what I mean? It's not emotional, it's just energy. This is for anyone. There's ebbs and flows. You're kind of like, I know something's doing that to me, but I'm not quite sure. A vague awareness of the overall touching. So know that is that you've been in contact with all of them from the beginning. But the place you got in contact with the rest from is the source. And that doesn't change. You can get much more aware of the other ones, and you can become a master of your terrain, and you can tour the facilities, and that's what you want to do. You become a master of this production house that you were gifted with. But understand that to do it properly, you must also know what you are. And that you are the steward of this, and properly you were meant to come at it from that place. I like that place. It implies a perspective and a position. It's both, that place. If you don't, you're not servicing yourself correctly. You're actually turning away from the gifts you were given. Don't let the world ever tell you that way of doing it is better than the way you were born. This way has a much longer track record and a better one. So know that. So you want to listen to that. I'm going a little sidetrack here quickly, but when we get to the metaphysical chiropractic, is this one you'll look for is why a person can't note that. For example, there are certain basic sensations, such as temperature or pain, and when you go to a doctor's office, they'll often do things to your knee or pick your fingers or whatever, so that they'll see if you respond to that. They'll do things to your eyes to see if your eyes dilate, because that can indicate there's an issue there. With Mojo reading, it's the same thing, and it goes now in talking about how a person is wired. So the reason you want to know Mojo reading is so you can see how they are doing and you're doing, because there is an innate will to shine. If they're unaware of their source power, if their source power sounds foreign to them, for example, and because Peak Pathways is designed to both help you become the most awesome hero you can, but also teach you what that is if you have forgotten or were never taught. So to start with that is you have to become, find the force. You have a force in you. That force is going to come from your source. You want to make contact with that. That's the first part of peaking properly. Source. You must actually be a proper steward to your source. All your powers come from there. But there'll be a pull, as I said, and that's because the next half of the 4 considerations, so whatever part of subjectivity, objectivity, perception, and discernment was not covered by the source will have to be covered by the tandem. This always entails, I'll say this, the compound relationship. This is covered earlier, but it'll be on one side of the brain. And that's because really you can't separate the two. For example, over here, when you are operating in a directive capacity in any way, you need a map and steering. Even when you're looking at a map, when you move your hand around a map, that's a kind of steering. When you're actually steering on the road and you actually go to the right down this road, down the left down this road, that's a map. So there's no way at any point that you don't do both together. Same on the right. You're getting stimulus in and you're staying balanced. You're staying balanced while stimulus comes in. There's no point in which it's just one thing. It's adaptive powers and directive. And as I mentioned before, really it's one configuration. But that's the next thing to note is the tandem power will perfectly back up the source power and give it what it needs to operate at a basic functionality, handling 4 considerations, but missing 2 priorities. Those 2 priorities will both be on the far side. If they were a left brain preference person, then it'll be on the right, and for the right preference, it'll be on the left. Now we're going to talk about modulation. What will those far powers be? Oh, sorry, before I go there, on the compound, as mentioned before, there can only be 2 directions from any source. The source itself, though, is inherently different in that at its root it's not. At its root it's the power as designed by the human matrix as a totality. But once it comes down into the size a human could comprehend, it has already gone down to where it's been split off into its tandem power variation. Because anything more than that would just be too much to hold. But you can, for example, when you do higher spirit form and you merge, when you merge with all the humans, you can actually understand that briefly. But whenever you come back down to be you just can't work like that. Whatever the tandem power is, that will be the power that gets modulated next, because we're trying to keep whatever's coming from the source. It doesn't matter if it's perceptions or discernments, whatever's coming from the source, we're trying to keep the quality of that, the integrity of that, the fidelity of that as much as possible as it goes on its complete journey. That's the idea. So to process it to its highest state and keep as much of it as possible. So the offside is the easier of the improving of it, or the raising the quality of making it more heroic. So there will generally be a feeling of maturity associated with it. It's an aspect of the person's psyche that they're aware they can do, but it takes more effort to do so. But they're more willing because that is easier to do, the offside to the tandem, because the sizes in the psyche, the priorities are closer together. There will always be an end formation for all of them. So if it is subjective perception, any of those 4 that start there, it'll begin here and then it'll come up to the other left brain power to finish up the considerations, and then it'll go diagonally across the hemispheres to its offside power. This offside power will be the most opposite from the tandem, and then the polar, and the polar will be the most opposite from here. The same information will happen regardless if you start here, same thing. It'll then go back to the subjective perception, then diagonally to here, and then back to there. Start here, back, forward, back, and then what's sage discernment? Sage discernment, forward, back, ending here. Okay, so that builds up momentum, that end formation. When that happens, that's sort of like the part of the stream that's above the surface. And that surface, more of it comes off surface as you mature and get stronger. So all four of the conscious powers are above surface, but for example, the offside and polar, particularly persons not well developed or they're young, not a lot of it will be above surface, but some, always some, so it does get tickled, that stream does get felt. The stream returns to the source by going back the way it came underground. Okay, that can happen sometimes in real life. So the stream goes this way and returns through an underground water system that is not seen. Or sometimes it goes over other water and drops down under tides and comes back under unseen tides, unfelt tides most of the time. Okay, that is where the unconscious powers come in, or the spirit form referred to as the other. The making contact, whenever you go from the source power, you answer the rest of the considerations, then you go to the offside power to modulate the tandem, to make sure that only the best stuff continues on the journey. Doesn't matter if it's an idea, an action, a life path, whatever, it does that. And then the polar modulates the source. But whatever gets through that, whatever from the source goes all the way down through there and make contact with the polar, will stimulate the currents of the unconscious powers. The first to wake up, the most responsive, is the unconscious power in your furthest quadrant. It could be whatever that is for you, but it'll be the end of your end formation. That has the strongest power sent back. It's the reward for your heroic work. We're all basically wired to get heroic juice fixes, to feel these shines, these moments of heroic pioneering, the feeling that you are both a noble, strong, winning person, and that you're doing something big, unprecedented. Your life's important. All Mojos are wired that way, that they feel like their life is very important the more down the peak pathway they go. Something else to consider is, I'll get that later. Once you make contact from the source to the polar, whatever makes contact there will stimulate the unconscious materials of the psyche of your other half of your story. Whatever your top power is, its inspirational other power, we've already gone that other lessons, will be how you're wired, because it wouldn't make any sense otherwise. It's what's needed to send it back the rest of that story. So those who are unfamiliar with their other side, this is a really big opportunity for personal development. All the peak pathways are stages of personal development, but this is one that even people who are very developed often can feel foreign. But that's a sign that you need to grow, is that the other half of your own story seems weird or off-putting in any way to you. So going back to metaphysical chiropractic, those are things to look for. In the beginning, a big one is not being able to note their source power, what it is, and that it's important, and that they are getting energy and stuff from it constantly. If they're not aware of that, that's a starting point. Moving to the tandem power. The tandem power is automatically going to take them from subjective to objective, or vice versa. If the person is unaware or off about that, for example, there are those who can see themselves by their subjective powers or their objective powers, even though that's not how they're wired. So again, going to chiropractic, the thing to look for immediately is, okay, that's probably a tandem issue. Then it is adaptive and directive. When you start going over to the modulation side is, does the person unaware of it, or overly aware. This tends to be the thing that happens is they actually identify too strongly with that and think somehow that might be their source. So they think they're adaptive when they're directive or vice versa. Or it scares them and they actually think that kind of thinking is weird. If that's going to shake you, then you're really going to get shaken when you meet the other, because it gets more you, but you haven't seen before, or seems weird to you. And so it starts with going to the modulation side. Is a lot of people have a lot of almost like metaphysical constipation because their powers coming from their source, their tandem, are generating this energy and are going to. You really can't do anything about that except make something productive with it. Is a fear of where it's going to land. And so you are wired that your source and tandem powers are going to generate stuff that needs to land on the modulation side, whichever way that goes. If that doesn't happen, there's going to be frustration inside, and then also a suppression of a person's natural gifts as they learn to fear that welling of great energy, because what can you do with it? If you ever feel like that, know that you need to work on your peak pathways, your understanding of it, because you are wired to get tremendous amount of energies and then have that flow all the way down a beautiful and complete heroic story. So that's all humans. All humans have that. So now we get to the part that is even more advanced than that, is you've gone from your source, you've identified what that is, and you've gotten your strength from there. You know, like Green Lantern going to his lantern, that's where he gets power from. And then you recognize the tandem power as the aid, and that makes sense as a combined process. That's another thing to look for too in the beginning, is when not only perhaps they mistake subjective for objective or vice versa, but they see their tandem and source powers as separate states, as really different. Do you know what I mean? They don't actually see them as kind of one contiguous process. They're kind of like on one end of the beaker or the other end, kind of like this fluid going. They see them as like, that's this mode, that's this mode, very modular. The peak pathway that's important is once you learn the universal design, how you're wired, that's kind of sure where the pieces are. But it's kind of like learning a martial art in a way, or how to ride a bicycle, how to swim. You really can't learn it in a book like that. There's a motion to it. And so peak pathways, you start learning how you naturally generate energy and let it go and do what it's supposed to do. When the polar power is reached from content from the source, it will stimulate the return journey, and if it is a discernment, that will be the discernment in the opposite. We talked about there's major modulation, minor modulation, basically it's the offside of tandem and the polar to the source. There's also perception modulation and discern modulation. And that's why there's two letters to pay attention to, is the end pattern, which everyone has the peak pathway, end pattern one direction, and then the return end pattern. And then also the X, which is the modulations of the perception and the discernment. So it doesn't matter which one they lead with, their heroic missing half is going to be extremely strong in the area of the brain, that quadrant activity that is the most, the furthest from their source. And same for the perception, same thing. That will be the perception in the area that you naturally are not strong at, but your other is. The problem is you couldn't hold both of the channel. You couldn't hold both ends of the channel. It feels weird to do that, so you hold half of it, and then the unconscious part of you, the inspirational other, actually holds the other half. So again, there needs to be an acceptance of yourself and recognizing your innate heroic configuration, so that when it comes back to you, it's not seen as bad. A lot of people, for example, who are right brain, extremely right brain, or left brain, extremely left brain, when they encounter their own far side activity, that can weird them out. And that's just right brain activity done from a left brain point of view, for example. But when it goes to the inspiration other, it's now going to be that kind of activity, the far side, but from dominant, from that main point of view. That creature in your psyche possesses those powers in its strong side. So it'll feel very different. It'll feel very adaptive to your directive or vice versa. So this is the beginning of understanding very much about non-duality. It begins with a non-duality between in and out. That's the first one. Between source and tandem is taking away that concept of duality. It's not really there. Then you go over to modulations. That takes away the concept there's a duality between your left and right. Really, it's one whole, of which you start from one point in it. And now, the whole under half, you're realizing, that's not duality either. That's just the other half of me. I don't really see it all during my conscious understanding most of the time. So, how do you become aware of this? Material will rise up. So what'll start happening is, if you imagine it, is like imagine like lava coming up from the seabed. If you're on top of the sea, what you'll first start noticing when you've gone out there. So let's say you've gone out there and you're dropping anchors in there, you're doing your source, your polar, and you've made contact. How do you know you've summoned these unconscious powers in you, these greater powers from the unconscious depths of yourself? The water will rise. Watch movies, you notice that. Dragon comes out of the water, Titan comes out of the water, volcano comes out of the water, anything comes out of the water, first thing you notice is the boat just starts going up. The water level just across the board goes up. This is the stage we call the wave swell. After you make the heroic effort, which you should be able to sort of consciously understand a bit if you work yourself from source through polar, you'll have done it. The next half of this, you're kind of going to surf. So this is the beginning of being ready to surf it, is because you're going to be sent back energies that are much greater than you can normally hold in your conscious understanding, but you're going to try to catch as much as you can. That's the idea. When that happens, there will be a greater viewing of the rest of things going on in your psyche. The first four powers, the conscious ones, is, imagine if the waves just kind of come up. All of the ships that were around you, all the other islands, all of the things that were out there will make more sense to you because you're rising above that now. Your area of the water is literally above them. Now, nothing's come out of the water yet. However, your own natural perspective is much higher. Remember how you have your source power is above the land line, and it decreases to tandem, to offside, to polar less and less? All those, as the waters underneath the surface are coming up, all your normal springs, they all start elevating. Now that can be a great period, but because it can help you actually get better at the first four stages of the peaking. However, later on, you want to get ready for the tidal wave that's about to happen, and this is when the unconscious powers are to give you stuff. So take that really energized feeling, almost like the feeling before a storm comes. In the psyche is that feeling like you know something powerful is about to come. And during that time, you'll find your normal stuff, like metaphysically speaking, doors start opening, all kinds of files come out, they want to talk to you, they haven't talked to you for a while, and you can get into that, but the more important thing is the unconscious content that you've not ever seen. That's the stuff you really pay attention to. So as the water comes up, get your boat ready to surf, because you were doing ship sailing, now you're doing ship surfing. So that ship you had is about to now turn around and return back where it came, but surfboard style. That's basically what you do. You know, kind of like the great metaphysical analogies is usually a hero, male or female, that goes out a great distance until they're lost. And then they make contact with it, which I think we should all know, hopefully, is ourselves. You always go out in the force, and in the end, you're making contact with you. So when that happens, you're now going to feel a tidal wave. This is the inspirational other coming to you. And I call it tidal wave because it incorporates two powers. It'll be both the source and the tandem of your inspirational other. And so for this reason, it's often going to be felt in the mind, and this gets into the spirit forming, which we talk about in other pathways. We should mention it here, Because once you start, we talk about this, is where spirit forms comes in. That's basically where it comes in, is when you peak pathway is kind of like lightsaber training for a Jedi to teach you how to use the Force and just shoot lightning and levitate, StarCraft out of the swamps and shit. So the peak pathway is the sequence, especially the first 4, to kind of get you ready for the big stuff, the stuff that you have to surf. And then once you get to be a professional surfer, that's when you're doing spirit forming. And so basically, I would say the wave swell on is the segue between strict mojo kind of conscious understanding and the more purely unconscious channeling quasi state of spirit forming. And so that's kind of how you do it. And you do it by going 1, 2, 3, 4 and tagging. From the source power, you go through the sequence and you capture as much as you can, and you kind of tag the far end of the psyche, the far end of the pool. And when you do, you get your boat ready, because now you woke up the creature in you, those great vast powers under the surface. When it comes, it will come to you as a send down spirit form in more of a dialoguing form, more in visions, more in emotions, vibrations, anything like that. It's not going to be something you can technically understand in a cerebral kind of way. It's simply going to give you content from that area, and you're going to ride it back. So that's the first thing to remember, is when a tidal wave comes, is if you attempt to break down the source and tandem power gifts being given to you. This gets related to spirit forming, all the kind of stuff we talked about, the Tibetan bardos. It's the same thing. If you try to grab, you'll drop it or get wiped out. The wave will just smash you. So you either get smashed up or you'll drop it. Either analogy is bad. You're the egg that gets dropped, or it is the egg that gets dropped. So either way, you drop the ball, so don't do that. You want to ride it. And so your psyche has a heroic way it dialogues with you. Your inspirational other has a dance it naturally does with you, and it'll come to dance with its dance partner. Its partner called out to it in a heroic way, and it's going to answer. When that happens, it'll often feel like a heroic, epic story surrounding yours, because you started from whatever side you did, and then you kind of paddled out to the far side of your psyche, all the way to your polar. So the furthest away from your starting point. And so you're going to naturally feel a bit weak. And that's a bit scary. That's why you had to go through that if you do spirit formings. Going to the far side has a lot, oftentimes, to going through the Daryu, going through this off side and the polar powers. Once you've done that, though, you're going to be tired, but then comes this super sweet reward for having done the heroic effort. And it'll often feel like the inspirational other is coming to your aid, or that a big turning point has happened. You kind of, and this is why, the way in storytelling, there's always this. There's that working the hero to exhaustion, and the feeling of they've done all they can, what else can there be? But there is a reward for having faith. And again, in Pod Lair, you only have to have faith in one thing: the beauty and amazing nature with which we have been designed by natural law. The fact that you have this in you, and you're built to be the hero. You're built to win. So when you do the thing that takes great effort, takes the maturity, that takes the mastery, a heroic effort, your psyche rewards you for that faith in yourself. If you have faith in one thing, you have faith in yourself. And so you do your peak pathway, you do it well, your inspiration or other will then give you gifts. Gifts that are of most relevance to your source and your tandem. The unconscious source and unconscious tandem will be gifts extremely relevant and validating. That's a huge thing. They'll be extremely validating for the place, the heroic place of your source and tandem. Next, that journey will continue back over to your near side, but it is the weaker length of the journey for your unconscious other. And so now it is working on an act of faith. An act of faith on you. It has a faith in you that not only does it give you those near side gifts to itself, which is your far side, it's now going to its far side. It's going to struggle for you. It's going to swim out there. And it's going to use its lesser abilities on its offside and polar, which are in your strong areas, for your cause, because it is the other half of your story. So it's now struggling to complete that story, and it should break your heart how much your other wants to finish the story for you. And that will just turn your source power up for another go, and you can do that forever and beyond forever and come back again and again, because that never gets old. Your story never gets old. Now it's done well, it just gets better. Now, that also we call the coastal waves, because it's getting closer to, I'll call the starting landmass. Kind of like a planet. Technically, where's the starting point? But if you're Australian, where's the start? Australia. So that's kind of how it works here. So in your psyche, it's just kind of one thing, but for you, that starts there. When the peak pathway flow is returning to that landmass, we call it a coastal wave, because the waves from the other are returning to your coast, right, to your landmass. As that happens, it'll naturally also, because they're doing the heroic effort of reaching so far, and it is getting back to your backyard. So that means it's far for them, which pulls on your heroic nature to go do it. It doesn't matter if you're logic-based or whatever, it will pull on your heroic nature to go finish up that heroic story, because you're built to do that story again and again and again, better and better. But also, like the tidal wave, it's still unconscious, so it'll have more of a experiential kind of feel to it. And so you should try to divide it up and try to, that's my seventh power activating, and that's this and that, because it'll ruin the ride. So when the wave swell happens, the ride's about to happen. Whoosh! Out in the middle of nowhere, how am I going to get back to where I started? I went so far away. But your other will tidal wave you back. And then it'll keep taking you as far as it can with its coastal wave back to your shore. And that should make you want to get out on your shores and put your boats up and go out there and do some more. Because that was what's waiting out there. Basically like your inner god or goddess is waiting out there. It's in you. So you basically have to paddle out to your inner divinity, your inner truth. It'll be there and you go, ah, and you'll be awed by you. And that's another reason why it has to be the other. Because there needs to be the experience of awe for humans. Spiritual awe. But the cool part is it comes from you. We're wired to be in awe of our own inner story and the story of all humans. So that's important. It's okay for us to have the divinity within ourselves. That's not a problem. But it's also important that the apparatus has something greater than itself. And that's why when people don't feel they have that, they often project that need for a greater thing onto someone else and give their power away. When really that greater thing was within them. You possess a greater thing. If you get tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of gifts from your greater undiscovered self inside, that deeper, greater self, you'll still have an infinity amount of tons to have done when you check out of here. You have to keep coming back because there's just more. There's more and more and more and more, and that's the beauty of it. And once you touch the peak pathway, you're pretty much, you're a superhuman that humans get. You're as superhuman as humans get. Right there. And then the last part is the wave break. The coastal wave actually crashes up on the shores, and now goodies are coming from the shore. From that deep ocean. The actual ground underneath the ocean floor churned up like unbelievable materials. Things had explosions and made this tidal wave, and now you rode it to the coastal wave and you landed safely and you ushered it in. And now you're here. There will be a stage where stuff keeps getting washed up even after you've kind of safely landed. Now, friends, this is the time to check inventory. Because there's going to be desires. I was telling you everyone to hold off on it, but this is the stage of the journey when you do that. When after the encounter is over with your other or dialogue, whatever, you then say, what was that I just experienced? It's the I just came out of a dream state. And you do want to journal then. Don't journal while you're still dreaming. That stops dreaming. So during those earlier parts, you just let it happen and capture as much as you can and just take it. And then once you land on your shores, there'll be that kind of, whoa, what just happened? When you're in that state, that's the time I'd get a pad and pen and note things down and jot them. You'll get a lot of great insights then. But don't try to capture it at that point, or actually it'll shut the thing down. It'll put an anchor. It'll put an anchor down and the peak path will go to stop, so to speak. Now, a couple other things. This is something else. It's really just a period, but it throws some people off, so I'll mention it. It's not really a separate period. I mentioned it's called a refractory period, in that the cycle just keeps going and going and going. However, it has a pulsing effect. So once it spends energy out, there will be a period where the source power is ready to fire again. It'll actually build back up again. As it builds back up, not unlike sexual arousal, it'll actually have an increased desire to use its energy. It'll start just by being energy, and the person may not even notice it's being built up. Does that make sense? Unless they're stimulated by something that would cause that, and that's what you want. You want to learn how to stimulate your source power. The reason why I mentioned the refractory period is because the refractory period can be prolonged if a person is, most people are not actually peaking correctly on a daily basis. Their environment's not set up well, they don't have the right bubbles. Because that signal I said to you sounded very like, wow, here I am, right, I'm really in it. But that's only if you were able to touch it the whole time. What usually happens is that the signal is not kept. What's needed to keep the flow, so the flow level is high, is not maintained. So, for example, a person does something on their strong side. When they do this, that sends a signal that completes the entire loop and comes back to their shore. However, the less conscious awareness and control they're exerting when this is going on, those return waves will be undercurrents. They will not be currents understood. Those currents, the tidal wave and the coastal wave and the wave break, will all happen underwater. They're things that move your legs, they move your ship, they change the ground, but people understand why foundations are changing, why the ships are changing, why these various things are changing, the water levels. Does that make sense? Why the water was trending one way really fast, now it's going the other way really fast? Because underwater changes are happening. So what happens is, if a person is less developed, it's not like, are they not peaking? No, it isn't that like they all of a sudden, that whole process stops. Just the vast majority of it is underwater. It's, in fact, a lot of people have their offside and polar processes underwater. Does that make sense? So the cycle's still happening, but remember analogy, it's like the four of them like a wheel, and four above the water and four down there. It's kind of like four in, the other four kind of like splash out like a wave and show themselves and back down. It can get to where they barely come over the surface to do that. Does it make sense? The water just kind of comes up, there's a buoyancy, but it doesn't really show itself. You gotta coax it. Okay? It can be more so, this often happens because the Dar using the way, in this case, the offside and polar development, the modulation development is not done well enough. And in that case, you'll actually get circle to where 6 of the 8 powers are underwater. All of them except the source and the tandem are underwater in that analogy. Does that make sense? To where all kinds of stuff is hitting them. Like, for example, he actually not only has a lot of his, obviously his other is pulling on him he's unaware of, but he actually has a great deal of his own far side conscious abilities, should be conscious abilities, that are very underconscious. They're conscious, but they're not nearly as conscious as they should be. And for that reason, a great deal of the tides going on, he doesn't understand where they're coming from. And again, this goes back to why people feel thrown about. Everything you experience in your life comes from your psyche and the peak pathway your psyche is configured in. So, knowing the waterways, it goes smooth. You're like a steam engine pilot going up there. You're going up the river, going down the river. You got good freight going one way, good freight going back. That's how you would do it. You would take freight from your source and take it all the way out to the polar. Then your unconscious will give you gifts, and you take that cargo and bring it back to your shore as best you can, and keep doing that. Over time, you know those waterways really well, you know all the offshoots, you can go on these little excursions, you can do all kinds of little pioneering in there, and you make great return on investment up and back, up and back, up and back. That's basically how you're built to do it. Now, if you don't know what you're doing, you can get out there, take the boat upstream, and you crash. And you can believe that this riverboat captaining stuff is not for me. Well, it is. Are you a human? Yes. Then you have spirit forms and mojos, so you don't get a choice. You are a spirit form mojo captain. Get good at it. That's it. Find what kind of boat you got and get good at it, because that's the game. If you kind of like you hit like a thing in this the fair, and it hits the pad with a hammer and like sends out a signal, that's happens if you take your source power to your tandem, it sends a signal out. all that way. And you may even feel it all the way back. If you hit it that hard at source, it may go all the way around. But imagine if you actually then walked out to the next station and hit that. And so basically that's the idea, is knowing what all your stations are so you can signal to your next station. And it gears the next ones up and they give you what you need. You're an assembly line made to make a beautiful, awesome product. So you just have to wake up your assembly line and make them all talk to each other and become aware of who's in charge. That's important, who's in charge and how that process works. And then you're ready to rock and roll. You were ready when you got here. I don't know what the world taught you, but you actually were ready when you got here, and then you had to learn to deal with the memes that were here. So that's what we're trying to do now, is actually get people to understand the process that's going underneath all the memes. And so the Universal Human Design, 5 years of mojo reading, and now we're getting to the peak pathways. So the Human Design and the 5 years, we're kind of really dealing mainly with the first 4, but now we're talking about all 8 and what it takes to make them happy. And now you're like, well, that sounds really awesome, but it's kind of vague as far as like, how do you actually make it happy? Well, there's a whole science to that, and that's where social alchemy comes in. In fact, you can mention this in the article, or the doc we're doing here is Peak Pathways is basically sort of like explaining what ship you have, the waters you have, and how you would need to set a bubble up in the abstract. What you would need to know then, if we're now going to put yourself into the real world, is that you were designed with all the other humans, and they're out here. And not only are they out here to deal with them, they've also been doing memes. So all of the humans out here and how they're doing things currently, the social alchemy of that, and all the means that have come to social alchemy, that's going to have a huge impact in your peak pathway. And that's why you have to have all 5 of these things. Because once you went into the social alchemy, you're like, well, how would you make that perfect? Potential community. So that's why I have all 5. So first you're human. That means you can be read. There's a visual language, a zoological language, and now we're getting into just like any other creature. Once you understand the way a creature mates, the way they hydrate, the way they hunt or gather, you can help that creature have the best life possible. That we are unique in that we are creatures with this advanced level of consciousness that we now understand what is pushing all of it. And know this, your peaking is like the absolute purest juice you have ever felt and ever will feel and are feeling right this very second while you watch this or they read this article. When you eat food, it is the communication between those senses and your psyche, and then your psyche's interpretation of whether that's positive or negative, that gives you the feeling you have. When you actually have sex with someone, when you go on a nice long walk, all these things are basically your psyche interpreting information. Now, I can get all super guru on you today, so it's all about how you interpret things. Okay, but that's a little bullshit. And I'm an IG, so I can call bullshit on that. That's bullshit. And I can do some serious mind or matter stuff, but that's bullshit. You do have a way you are wired. And that's what you would get in contact with. And anyone who doesn't know that, they shouldn't be telling you anything, because they're actually telling you to override your programming, I assuming based on some sort of meme level of knowledge. Don't let meme level knowledge ever tell you how to deal with natural laws like millions of years of evolution knowledge. That's just mega cosmic stupid. Peaking. When you do the peaking, you will feel heroic. For example, when you get energy, proper energy, you feel heroic. It's the way humans are. If you ever do something, you take a shower, you actually help someone out, you do a good job on a test, whatever that means to you, it's important. You get energy that you did something well. The trick is realizing who the highest authority is on deciding those. If you don't have good connection to peak pathway, that can come, the strokes come from the outside. The strokes should come from your understanding of yourself. If you're an objective mojo, still it is your interpretation of the objective environment, not the objective environment's interpretation of you. That never changes. And so once you get used to the peak pathway, what will happen is, from source to tandem, definitely, from near side to far side, even more dramatically, and then when you go out to the other and back, the most dramatic, is energy. You'll get a return on energy greater than the output. You may get tired, But the energy, when it comes back, when you recover, your ship is stronger with more fuel, with a desire to go further than the last ship you had. Does that make sense? Validation. Not only is it energy, I use the word on purpose, it is proper energy. It is the unconscious source and unconscious tandem powers are going to validate the existence of your source and your tandem powers. It's now going to give energy back. It's going to give energy because you did a great job in this great way. That's important. So it's giving energy because of the way you did it and what you did. That is that heroic storyline done and done well in that way. Which means you can hold on to the energy more. If you are embarrassed of the way you're wired, it's very hard to hold on to your greater energies because your storyline is not embarrassed of itself. So that's you, the captain, embarrassed of its ship and embarrassed of the ocean it's in. That's basically what you are. You're the captain of a ship, that's your first 4 powers, and really it's the whole ocean. And why are you even here? I mean, really, that's the whole point of you being here. You're born, you don't have a choice. This is the ocean, and you are the captain of the ship, and you have to go out there and find the stuff and bring it back. Bring it back first for yourself, and then for humanity. All humans have to do that. So what else do you get for peaking? This heroic juice fix. Real fast, energy, validation, confidence. Is when you get that energy, and it's energy because of the way you were, your version of hero, it makes you think, what? Not only am I doing a good job, the way I do it is innately good. I don't have to overly alter my wiring. That's important. Memes are going to tell you a lot of how you do shit differently, but you actually come as a spiffy hero. Your story is already spiffy. You just got to figure out how to interface it out here. So as the more you do the peaking, you increase confidence as you become super masterful. All humans can become super masterful at themselves. So that's the key. But you can't do it if you don't know yourself, and you can't know yourself if you don't love yourself. You start with that. You actually understand that I am wired in an innate way, and it's beautiful. Just go with that. Because to make actually touching your far side and touching your conscious power is much easier if you go in with like, I don't know what's out there, but I know it's beautiful. I know it's part of me. I know it's meant to be there. So that's important. Otherwise, you go out there all like, and how your unconscious power is supposed to interpret that? Think about that. You know what I mean? Like that's going to make them think maybe we shouldn't go. Maybe we shouldn't show. All right. What else? Belonging. Belonging and purpose. When you go down your peak pathway, you'll consistently see that you were meant to do this, and that actually has, I'm going to wrap it up now, and actually has a positive contribution to a heroic story. On a small scale all the way up to the largest scale. And for that reason, you realize that you belong to something bigger than yourself, and humans need that. And you and yourself possess that bigger thing. And every time you go from your source to your polar and then ride back from that other world that is you, you're like, wow, there's this big epic story and I'm a part of it. In fact, I'm it. I'm the main person. I'm the hero. My life is incredibly important. And purpose. Because important, I need to do stuff. I need to keep getting this. It's not just, oh cool, get light. No, like it's vitally important that I get my enlightenment on. The world needs this. I need this. It's necessary. Natural law has engineered me over all this time to do this. It's extremely important. It has to happen. If I don't do it, actually I'm letting myself down and really all of humanity down, because I have these gifts and they were given me. And when you do the peak pathways, Mojo is basically magic that works. Peak pathways, straight up, that is as superhuman as humans get. Peak pathways is as superhuman as a human gets. It's all their unlocked potential and how you basically sequence to keep getting more of it. More and more and more and more. So, get ready to break some records, humans.